Well, a very good morning and welcome to a very special edition of The Week That Was, focusing on the seat of Solomon. We know that tomorrow is indeed Federal Election Day, the day in which we'll determine who's going to be the Prime Minister, but who's going to represent us here in Darwin and beyond in the seat of Solomon. Now, we decided we'd do The Week That Was a little bit different and invite some different panellists on this morning. I mean, we've still got our regular, Matt Cunningham. Good morning to you.
Morning, Katie.
Now, Matt and I are sharing a microphone, so it could be interesting because we both love a chat. But we've also got our three candidates for the seat of Solomon in the studio with us this morning. We've got independent Phil Scott. Good morning to you, Phil.
Good morning. Pleased to be with you.
Yeah, lovely to have you on the show. We have indeed got the CLP's candidate, Lisa Bayliss. Good morning to you, Lisa.
Good morning, Katie, and good morning to your listeners.
And, of course, Luke Gosling, not his first time in the studio for the week that was either, the incumbent member for Labor. Luke Gosling, good morning to you.
G'day, Katie.
Good to have you all in the studio. Now, I know that you've probably all heard the show before, but just to remind our listeners, it is, of course, a discussion about the issues of the week, but we will focus on some of the more important issues which have been raised by our listeners here on 360 ahead of tomorrow's federal election. Now, just a reminder to please be respectful of one another. Obviously, everybody will have the opportunity to speak, but you can refute as you go. Matt and I'll obviously ask plenty of questions as we go along as well. It is a discussion, it's not a debate, but you will hopefully get a bit of time at the end to, to remind those out there listening why they should vote for you. But let's get into it. We know that crime has indeed been an issue which has plagued the Northern Territory for many years. We know that this is largely handled by the Northern Territory government, but it has once again reached tragic proportions with the death of much-loved Territorian Linford Fyke. Now, the Northern Territory government convened Parliament on urgency this week to pass legislation which will see the presumption against bail applied to serious violent offences, which includes assault with intent to steal and sexual offences such as indecent touching or indecent act. Now, according to the Attorney-General, the bill also changes the test for the offences that the presumption against bail is applied to require that bail must not be granted to a person unless the court has a high degree of confidence that the person will not, if released, commit a serious offence or prescribed offence or endanger the safety of the community. I mean, to me, it seems like common sense. I would have actually thought that was at the top of what was looked at by judges or indeed the Northern Territory Police when bailing someone.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. If you just allow me to make a few points about crime and law enforcement in general. And what the acting police commissioner talked about last week, which is the work we need to do to address the drivers of crime as well. Firstly, we are partnered. The Albanese Federal Labor government is partnered with Leah Finocchio's NT government to address these issues. Recently in Alice Springs, we agreed to a partnership including over $200 million for extra policing. So we know these are serious issues. The stats from police say that in the last 6 months, all levels of crime against a person, against property, theft, stealing, assault, grievous bodily harm, they're all up. So these are persistent issues that need real support from the Commonwealth. Let's be really clear, $9 out of every $10 up here is from the federal government. That's why our partnership is so important with the NT government. But we didn't give extra resources to the NT government for them to take conditions off police. So what we will do is continue to take the advice of police, and that includes to tackle the drivers.
What do you mean take conditions off the police?
Well, I'm a bit concerned that at the moment you've got the Police Association on here yesterday fighting for conditions for police when we need to recruit and retain as many police in the force as we can, and the extra money for policing seems to be being dodgied in a way that's not going to end up with a good result.
That's just not true.
Well, you'd have an interesting perspective from the Police Association.
As everyone knows, that when you have a negotiation process, that's actually a process that normally there's a little bit argy-bargy as we go through a negotiation. I've done quite a few in my time in the Police Association.
So housing's not going to be taken off police?
And clearly you haven't done any negotiations for the consent agreement, as far as I know, for any union area that you work for. but we're
Well, I've
talking.
never worked for a union, but anyway.
We're talking about the root causes of crime here. We're actually.
Now, that's what I was getting to in the second point, Katie. If I can finish the second point, or did you want to go to Lisa?
Well, let's hear it quickly.
Yeah, just quickly. So I put up $5 million for a youth engagement hub. That when the acting police commissioner talks about the drivers of crime, that's a big part of it, right? We want to support young people and make sure that they get on a good pathway. They've got mentors and so forth. That's incredibly important to us. But the other one is education, early education. The number of people have said, great that you're putting an early childhood and care centre in Karama, because we need to get around those families, support those families. We know that early education leads to better school outcomes.
Absolutely those things are required. We know that early intervention is something that the former Labor government had spoken a lot about generational change here on that local level. But
we need it.
We're in a situation where we have a wound that is bleeding, and it certainly needs to be stopped immediately.
You don't do that through undermining your police. That's my point.
But the fact is we do need, it's not just about the police, as you've also touched on, but we certainly do need to make sure, and we've seen over the last couple of weeks, we've spoken about it at length, like we've got a situation here where we had a young person who was bailed for incredibly serious offences. I mean, it boggled the minds of Territorians that somebody who had allegedly committed the serious crimes which had been committed was able to be bailed.
I think it's, Katie, we had over 8 years of Labor, and I think subsequently, look over the last 20 years, we've seen within our law enforcement and criminal justice system that the whole justice system has been focused towards the offenders. It's not been focused towards victims and community safety, and that is why we've had criminals continually get bail time and time again, including, youth. And that we've seen it. Like I've experienced as a police officer, you get youth that will say to you, "You can't touch me," and we know you arrest them and you release them as like a catch.
You're saying they say that?
They say that. They say that to They say that. They said it to me. They've said it to other police members, and it's been a very frustrating period. I think 8 years of Labor, we saw crime, law and order within the Northern Territory. It just turned to absolute rubbish. It's been lawless for a very long time, and I know that these bail changes will have the effect of putting the priority of community safety above that of the offender. We talk about the root causes of crime, and I think it's really important to understand that it's so multifaceted. It's not just about the family unit. It's about housing. It's about poverty. It's about substance abuse. There are so many layers within there, and having a proper understanding about the response that's actually required, I think it's vital to be able to work in partnership with the Northern Territory government and assist them. I'm just going to go back again to, for me as a former police officer of 30 years, I'm just going to touch on the consent agreement negotiations. I'm totally biased. I mean, I think the police, Northern Territory Police, should be the best paid in the country. I think we should have the best conditions in the country. My husband's still a serving police officer,
so they should get more than 3% then.
I cannot be impartial when it comes to this. But
so what sort of pay rise is reasonable for them?
But what I can say is that this is a matter for the Northern Territory government to work through, because we're not just looking at police. You're looking at all the different areas, education, health. Everyone always thinks that they need to get top dollar, and it's really hard. It's really hard to recruit and to retain police in the Northern Territory.
Your campaign's very closely linked to Leah Finocchiaro. I mean, what are you saying to her about what sort of pay rise police deserve in the Northern Territory?
And again, I'll go back to the Leah Finocchiaro government inherited an absolute mess from Labor government previously. Not just law and order, but a budget. They're massive deficit. So at what point do they need to also be fiscally responsible while at the same time trying to attract and retain police? That is a matter for them to work through with the Police Association. And again, I say, it's very difficult because I am someone who's clearly biased towards supporting the police. I'm a former police officer, and I always think the police should get every support possible, every resource possible. So,
well, you're not saying that though,
Phil. Your campaign, Phil, is all about, or has been all about, listening to the community and acting on what the community wants to see. Over the past week and a half, we've just seen an absolute outpouring of, I think, anger from the community over what happened to Linford Fyke. And I think I would be right in saying there's been widespread support for what the Northern Territory government did on Wednesday when it made changes to bail that Katie spoke about before. Do you support what the government did this week?
I absolutely believe that everybody has a right to feel safe in our community, and people who commit these violent offences need to be held accountable. So if this is going to help do that, great. What concerns me is that these responses are not being given proper consideration by lawmakers with enough time. So I understand that Justine Davis was only able to see this proposed bill at 10:30 on the day that it was proposed. That does not give me confidence that whatever these changes are going to be effective. I think that the community needs to be involved in how these bills are drafted. I'm very sceptical of parties imposing these without giving due opportunity for experts in the community in crime to have input into this.
Government.
Yes,
yeah,
but
that's what
and communities
does,
being ignored in the process. It's government as we're used to, but communities being ignored.
You've got to remember
here.
that the CLP government was elected basically because law and order got out of control in the Northern Territory. The community expect this. The community expect that we have the toughest bail laws in the country. But I think we're getting distracted because they're talking about local issues, and we probably should be talking more about the federal issues.
That's all you've been doing.
Well, look, I mean, the thing is, though, I guess what we do want to be sure of is that our elected members are going to make decisions. So I suppose, Phil, the question is, would you abstain from voting as Justine did in an instance like that? Or, I mean, does leadership come down to standing up and making a tough decision, even if it goes against what some in the community may feel is right, when you've got the majority saying, we actually want this issue stemmed and we don't feel it's appropriate that somebody who's committed a serious violent offence is on bail?
Oh, absolutely. I agree with that. I'm just saying that follow good process. Make sure that enough time is given to considering these issues properly and make sure that the community is able to participate in that process.
Can I just make a point, Katie, just quickly about youth diversion? I heard on your program, I think it was yesterday or the day before, you were talking to the Corrections Commissioner, and he was saying about youth diversion and they're thinking about a design for youth diversion. Oh, my God. Like, where are we? This government was backed by Territorians.
It was on a camp or a different program.
The community's been talking about bush camps for a long time. I've been on your program saying, when I talk to people out in the community, they say something like Wildman River, out of town, get kids out there in the bush, work with the families, work with the parents, get some responsibility back, get some discipline back. And we're hearing that they're thinking about a design now. I've had $5 million on the table for a youth engagement hub to stop kids just running through Casuarina Square shoplifting, and the CLP have knocked that on the head.
How long's that been on the table for?
That's been on the table since the last election. I committed that funding.
So the point is, though, that the points you're making are good, relevant points, but I think what a lot of people would argue is that there was 8 years of a Labor government here where we got all of these promises about these sort of
they
diversions.
moved the Casuarina Fire Station. They got rid of it. They did the co-design. They were ready to build.
But a lot of these things didn't happen though, did they? In that 8 year period.
I'm not here to defend the former NT government. What I'm saying is we are partnered federally. The Albanese Labor government is partnered federally financially to support the current NT government to do the job to make people feel safer in their community. And we're committed to that.
You've been in this position for 9 years, and I can tell you that out in the community, people do not feel safer. We had a Territory Labor government for 8 years.
Well, let's see some action then.
The actual disaster that has been left, a legacy that's been left because of them being in power, and I can say federally we're heading in the same direction.
Does the federal coalition government deserve some of the blame here? Because if you know the history, you'll know that in 2016 it was Malcolm Turnbull who, after a TV show went to air, got up the next day and called a royal commission. And in 2025, most people in the Territory would say that the outcome of that royal commission has not been beneficial to the Northern Territory. Would you accept that the federal coalition deserves to wear some of the blame here?
Look, I remember when we had the intervention, and it was Claire Martin was the Chief Minister at the time, and it's really easy to look back and think things should have been done differently, and I think they should have been. I think that it was literally handed over to the federal government to run everything, and it should have been led by the Territory. The Territory. But
I'm not talking about the intervention, that intervention that gets called the intervention. I'm talking about I'm talking about the Royal Commission that Malcolm Turnbull called in 2016.
With Adam Giles.
The Royal Commission
yes.
into youth detention.
Yes, yeah. No, I remember. And again, we saw the results of that was literally don't lock up use. And that's been, again, a disaster for the Territory.
Look, we are going to have to take a very short break. Well, it is 360 and it is the week that was a special edition with some of the candidates for the seat of Solomon and, of course, Matt Cunningham here with us. But we've got Phil Scott, Lisa Bayliss and Luke Gosling. Now, we know that when it comes to the election, there has been a lot of discussion about cost of living. I think it's safe to say that cost of living is one of the biggest issues impacting Territorians ahead of tomorrow's election, and the major political parties have taken different approaches in terms of trying to tackle the issue. The government, of course, announcing tax cuts, while the coalition focused on the fuel excise policy and some changes to cabotage for Darwin, so for our airfares, in an effort to really try to lower the cost of flights, something that is continuously raised as being a frustrating point. Look, there's lots of different ways to slice and dice the cost of living changes, but I think it's all safe to say that we are all still struggling with the cost of living. I mean, where are each of you at in terms of trying to reduce that cost of living for Territorians?
Yeah, look, Katie, I'll go first, if that's okay, Luke. Jump in there before you get in there.
Get into it.
Look, the coalition, that we've got a plan. You would have seen the posters around town. We want to cut the fuel tax excise by 50%, so that's saving 25 cents a litre every time you fill up your car, which is about $14 for a smaller car and a big $20 for a larger size one, particularly the four-wheel drives we have around the Territory. That's a real practical saving, I think, for families and businesses. It's something that every day we've got to fill up. Usually it's weekly that I fill up my car with petrol, so I think for families that's really, really important. For two-car family, you're looking at about $1,500 in a year, and speaking to people, it's been a very popular thing for people to hear that the coalition will do.
I'm sure it's popular.
The other thing that's
temporary though, isn't it?
The other thing, well, it is. It's for 12 months, and then at the end of 12 months, it'll be something that we could always reassess and do for another 12 months. And I think this is practical stuff for families, immediate relief that they're going to be able to work on.
Has that been discussed in a 12-month extension?
Well, it has been, but not locked in. It's one of those things. Let's see what the economy's like at the end of 12 months, and it'll be something that could be further done. It costs around about $7 billion, and particularly for the Albanese government, they're talking about bringing a tax cut next July, which is 70 cents a day, and it's costed at $17 billion. So even if we extend it for another 12 months, it's still cheaper than what is proposed by them. And I think the other tax cut that we talked about, that we're going to introduce, is it's a $1,200 rebate for those people who are earning under $144,000, which again I think will provide immediate relief for families come that tax rebate time. So
it's just a one-off though. It's not. It's just for one.
It is, and I think the economy of the state that it's in, people are really hurting. And the two things when I've been outdoor knocking, one is crime. Crime is still number one in the Territory, and the second thing is cost of living. And I know being remote, for the rest of Australia, everything's more expensive. We usually have higher wages, but everything's more expensive, and people are really hurting.
Can I do a bit of, just so we can compare and contrast? So cost of living's been Albo, the Prime Minister, and us here in the Territory, our number one focus when it comes to household budgets. Obviously, making people feel safer, we're committed to working with the NT government on that. But if we go to tax cuts, our tax cuts, if you're an average wage earner in the Northern Territory at the moment, if you're on, say, $75,000 a year, $1,700 tax cut this financial year, this current financial year, more in the next financial year, more in the next financial year. By 27-28, we're looking at $2,700 tax cut. So what I'm saying is they're permanent tax cuts. They're not just a one-off handout that Peter Dutton is talking about. I mean, with the fuel excise drop, it's pretty heroic to think that you're going to give all billions of dollars to fuel companies and that they're going to hand it all on to the consumer. What we've done is energy bill relief.
No
so
one's
off
handing
the
billions of
Jacana
dollars
bills.
to the.
But that's how it works. The funding
it
goes as a discount.
That's not
Can
how
I
it
just
works.
quickly, can I finish a point on energy bill relief? Of course, there's cheaper childcare, cheaper medicines through the PBS, all of that. But the energy bill relief off the Jacana bill, that's been consistent, and that is through to the end of the year.
So this is
and
after
we'll
the Prime Minister
that
promised everyone they'd get a $275
So it's $450
power reduction, and we've seen them go up by more than $1,300. So I don't think we can take too much for Labor's promises when it comes to electricity.
If I can just say what we're committed to, if I can just get that part out.
What do you reckon, Phil?
$450.
Phil, what do you reckon?
You might be committed to it,
What do you reckon?
but you certainly
What's your plan for cost of
can't make
living?
it happen.
First of all, tinkering around the edges with a 12-month proposal for a fuel excise is just so base. We, like these sugar hits that we give to the electorates every 3 years are why people are so sick of the lack of vision from the parties. We need systemic tax reform here. So we don't have a cost of living crisis. We have a cost of corporate greed by speaking. We have a cost of corporate greed crisis, yeah? We have small businesses paying 28% tax. We have working people paying a minimum of 30% tax. It is small businesses and working people who are doing the heavy lifting of our economy here, whilst Woolies and Coles are paying 1% tax whilst they price gouge consumers. Now, these guys don't talk about this stuff because these big corporations donate to their parties, and it's a pretty sweet deal that they've got going on. What we're suggesting is actually let's look at systemic tax reform so that we can address these sorts of things in the first place and actually permanently bring down the level of tax that small businesses and working people are paying. They've got more money to wash around in the economy. Small businesses have got more money to be able to invest in research, development, growth of that business. And that's a conversation.
Can I just ask you one before Luke has a go? But can I just ask you one question about the point you made about Coles and Woolies and those big corporations donating to the major parties? I saw a story in the ABC this week that had asked 35 Climate 200 backed candidates to disclose their funding. And I think 19 of them did and 16 of them didn't. And I think you were one of the ones that didn't. Correct me if I'm wrong.
What are you hiding?
Is if you're talking about this transparency and integrity, why wouldn't you make that information public?
We are scrupulous in making sure that we're adhering to the Australian Electoral Commission's disclosure laws.
I understand that, but your movement and your campaign has talked about going further than that. We want to be better than that. We want to be more transparent than that. We want people to have real vision across who's giving what money to who for what reason. Given you've set the bar there, should you not then comply with the bar you've set rather than what the AEC requires at the moment?
That's why we're campaigning for full disclosure, changes to these laws. At the moment, we adhere to the laws. We want to change the laws, but we're not going to cut off our nose to spite our face because we're already underfunded as a community independent campaign. Unlike the two parties, we can't afford to fly up volunteers from interstate to staff pre-polling booths in the last 2 weeks. We hundreds of volunteers. I've spoken to them.
Can I say, Luke, that you guys have spent more money on advertising, more money on call flutes than I believe I have, and so your budget is obviously quite healthy.
Luke or Phil?
Phil.
Oh, really?
Territorians know that because when they drive around Darwin and Palmerston, they see a picture of Phil on every corner.
You two sound filthy about the money he's getting. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think there's definitely questions that need to be asked.
He's got a billionaire backing him, Katie. That's my point.
I will get back to that in a second. Right. But, let's not beat around the bush. We know that the major parties do certainly get funding from the unions, and many would argue, the CLP from wealthy developers or wealthy people across the Northern Territory. But look, I do think what's a little bit different is that you don't really have a situation where the ALP or the Liberal Party or the CLP, they know that they're getting money from these big donors and I mean, I don't know who exactly is the major donors to you guys, but it has been an issue in the media this week, Phil, with the fact that that Climate 200 or Climate 2000, whatever they're called, that it is the major donor for teal candidates across Australia. How much money have they provided to your campaign?
I can't tell you. I'd have to speak to our numbers person. But to run when we did the numbers to start with,
ballpark?
no, I mean, that's what I keep getting asked by these guys because they want to know, and I'll be happy to share that after tomorrow. But we
After everyone's voted.
we are not funded in nearly the same way as these big parties are. They have about 80 shady fundraising entities each across the country. They raise about $500 million from billionaires, from big corporations to fund their campaigns. That you have a bunch of independents across the country who have $25 million
those
between them.
billionaires are bad that now fund you.
Who have $25 million between them trying to compete at that level. I mean,
I
just
certainly agree with
hypocritical.
that on a national stage, right? I agree with that on a national stage. But I think when you're talking about a seat like Solomon in the Northern Territory, it's actually a bit of a different discussion. Because I know even for Luke and Lisa, and I'm sure for some of the other candidates that are maybe running for the Greens or for whichever, whoever they're running for, you do have a general idea of who's making big donations to your party. I mean, or to your campaign. You do have a pretty good idea. And I think for, if you're going to run on a campaign of transparency, then it's important that you are transparent.
yeah, absolutely. Look, and like I said before, these guys are desperate to know how we're funding our campaign. We have hundreds of local donors from across our community who've donated. You can also have a look on the Climate 200 website where they're all listed. Yeah. So if you want to know who's donating, it is these folks. But the Climate 200 is a not-for-profit company that fundraises from regular Australians who want to see a change in our politics because they're over the two major parties. So they donate on the understanding that it's going to go towards community independent campaigns just to level the playing field. Now, what these guys would have is for us to be some two-pot independent campaign, scratching around for, a few $1,000s and running it that way. That's the way they'd like to see it. Yeah, but as soon as we get organised and we organise with local people and we actually have volunteers, rather than flying people up from interstate, they start squealing about it. Yeah? Well,
I'm just
any attack,
can I address that one?
Any sort of attack on this fundraising is an insult to the people from our community, the hundreds of folks who've donated to and continue to donate to this campaign. And not only that, are putting in hundreds, actually thousands of hours of in-kind volunteer support. None of us are being paid.
Can I redirect a question to these two? Because if you look at the result from 2022 in Solomon, more than 35% of the primary vote went to parties or candidates other than the CLP and the ALP, a number that has been growing every election for quite a while. Is there something that the major parties are doing at the moment that is turning off mainstream voters?
Well, yeah, let's see. It's up to every Territorian to place their vote where they think it's best for the Territory and the future of the Territory, the economic growth, the social growth. So that's a decision that's really important because there's a stark contrast between the two major parties. I mean, Lisa doesn't mention Peter Dutton much, but, he's the guy that's, putting his hand up to be the alternate Prime Minister and he's got no idea. But when it comes to the independents, they've actually got no policy.
Throwing insults, that's fairly typical without actually,
But really, he doesn't.
It's character assassination. It's very typical of Labor. You run a Mediscare campaign, you're constantly, throwing dirt, but actually, when you look at the substance and the policies that are offered, the Liberal Party and the Country Liberal Party, we're conservative, so we're all, bulk billing is something bulk billing is something that we have committed to, and we've in round health we've also committed to.
You haven't committed to bulk billing at all.
Let's move along and let's get
Luke.
constructive.
I
want to talk. I want to talk health, and I do want to talk about some of the announcements that have been made around health. And we know that the Prime Minister was indeed here last month to talk further about Labor's health and aged care plan for the Northern Territory. It includes $60 million to be used in partnership with an aged care provider to support the delivery of a residential care home for the Darwin region. Now, it's certainly, it is welcome news. We know that it's not the first time that money has been allocated to the Northern Territory when it comes to aged care beds. And goodness knows we need them. Like, we are in a situation where we've got senior Territorians, we have got people with dementia who are forced into beds inside Royal Darwin Hospital because there's nowhere else
I think we all
for
agree
them to
with
go.
that.
Like,
Yeah.
it's a terrible situation.
It
So,
shouldn't be
Luke,
happening.
why hasn't it happened sooner is the question that a lot of people are asking at this point, because we've been out for this before and we still have no aged care beds, no extra ones.
The aged care commitment from the last election that you rightly point to was for the operational costs of the bed, so funded beds, but not the physical construction of a new aged care facilities, although we have put money into the extra 26 beds down at Pearl for dementia. But when it comes to, so they're the beds that are funded, but when the previous NT government went out to market and said, all right, who wants to build and operate an aged care facility, no one could make it work.
Yeah. So how do they now?
Well, that's why we're stepping in, because we're putting 60 million of capital into the build. So the not-for-profit organisation that runs the aged care facility doesn't have to stump that cash up, which means we can get something done quickly. Like, there should be literally, straight after this election, we start design and build for a brand new aged care facility so that we can look after our
If we've got a provider,
Territorians.
though.
Yeah, but
We need a provider, though,
but there are
right?
lots
It's got
of
to
keen
stack up for them.
providers.
There definitely
There's
is this
lots of
time
keen
round.
providers. They just couldn't make it work without the extra capital from the federal government.
Keen to get your thoughts, Phil and Lisa, not only on this, but what will you guys do if elected to make sure that there is beds?
So, Katie, we actually made an announcement a few weeks ago around this as well. One of the key things that I've looked into since I got nominated as the CLP candidate was around aged care. So my parents, they're in their late 70s. They've retired here in the Territory. And it is really concerning that there is a lack of aged care facilities here in the NT. And interesting enough, we have one of the fastest growing populations per capita over 65. It never used to be that way. And we were known as the young capital within Australia. We're now actually I think it's becoming more expensive for people to go down south to retire, so they're staying in the Territory or they're moving to the Territory. That's really something I've noticed. But that was a commitment that was made, and I really fought very hard with the coalition to ensure that we could secure $60 million in funding. We not only want to match it, but it's something that we have a little bit of variety about where it's going to be built. We're not saying any one place, but however we could put that $60 million to ensure that we've got aged care people in hospital. 60 beds are currently taken up with aged care patients, and it's not an appropriate place for them to be.
They should be somewhere else. It's
Phil,
exactly
it's
right.
a tough one for you, I guess, as an independent, because you can't come out and make these big announcements like the two major parties can. I mean, what do you think needs to be happening?
Well, I mean, imagine if we actually had an independent in Parliament at any stage in the last 4 decades to actually advocate on behalf of Territorians, rather than have to endure major party power brokers in Canberra, Melbourne and Sydney calling the shots and pulling the strings, and all the while neglecting the Northern Territory, whose citizens have chronic levels of health disease, who are impoverished to degrees in a developed country that should not be the case, where we have substandard education because of this level of neglect. These guys don't give a stuff about the Territory. What we need is an advocate in Canberra who actually comes from the community, but not only that, is actually engaging with
So you mean someone who
peak
was born in the
bodies,
Territory, grew up here, spent their whole life here and has fought hard in the community for the Northern Territory,
and
will continue to fight here because her parents retired here, she's going to retire here.
All a part
so
of
if
our
you want
community,
someone who's a strong voice for the Territory,
the community knowledge,
that's me.
And the community
so I would say
expertise
vote
is
for
actually
Lisa Bayliss
included.
because I'm the one who's going to be fighting the hardest for the Territory.
I'm losing control. I left my microphone to Matt. He didn't step in. Now, hang on. I'm going to talk for a moment. Phil, the difficulty is, I suppose, and some out there listening will go, that all sounds good in theory, but it's really hard when you're an independent, because unless you hold the balance of power in some way, like we've seen here in the Northern Territory with the likes of Jerry Wood, or unless you're an incredibly effective independent, and we have had some incredible ones here in the Northern Territory Parliament, but how do you get whoever becomes our next Prime Minister to focus on the Northern Territory if you're not even at the table with them for that discussion?
Well, we are actually. So we're anticipating a minority government at this upcoming election. With that comes leverage.
None of the polls
and
are, though. The polls are saying...
The polls have been saying it's a 60-odd% chance of a minority government this election. That's what they've been saying. So we have enormous opportunity for leverage and negotiating power at a national level to have a community representative from the Territory advocating for things such as GST revenue, which once upon a time was in our interest, but now it's per capita based. We need needs-based funding here in the Territory.
We get 5 to 1. We get $5 for every dollar we put in when it comes to GST. We get the best GST deal by far of any state or territory in the country.
Yeah, and the outcomes aren't showing us the results we need to be having. So we need needs-based funding for education, for health, that we're not getting at the moment. We also need to be investing more. Our country spends $250 billion on healthcare every year. 3% of that goes into prevention. Prevention measures, we need to spend more on prevention and actually stopping people from ending up in hospital in the first place. That's what the medical community is saying, and we just need somebody to actually listen with them, but not only that, work with them to be able to get better outcomes for us.
Look, we're actually going to have to head to a break because I want to come back and talk about the Darwin Port and Middle Arm, and I want to give each of you a minute to describe or tell people why they should vote for you. So let's take a really quick break. You are, of course, listening to Mix 104.9. It is the week that was, a special edition with some of the candidates for Solomon and, of course, Matt Cunningham stealing my microphone. Well, if you have just joined us, you've missed out. It's been plenty of fun in here. It is indeed the week that was, but with some of the Solomon candidates. We've got Phil Scott, Luke Gosling and Lisa Bayliss in the studio with us this morning. Now, I do want to talk about the Darwin Port. We know the Federal Coalition and indeed Labor have both now said that the port will return to Australian hands. The way in which it will happen, I guess, remains to be seen, and both parties sort of going down a bit of a different path when it comes to returning the port to Australian hands. I mean, I think it's safe to say when this port was leased, it's one of those topics, you know, that got our phone lines absolutely screaming off the hook. You know, people didn't want it to be leased, but we were in a situation where there really was not an investment into the port. I mean, Luke, keen to find out from you, how exactly will it come back into Australian hands if Labor is re-elected? And if it's such an important issue, why hasn't it happened sooner is something that I know listeners will be asking this morning.
Obviously, your listeners understand that we've been in government for 3 years as the federal government. And 10 years ago, when the CLP flogged the port off for 99 years, we were against it and critical of it, and I've been consistently critical of it. But what we have seen is a lack of investment out there and a worsening of the situation as it is strategically in the Indo-Pacific, and we've seen a bigger focus from the federal government on defence in Northern Australia. So $14 to $18 billion coming out of the Defence Strategic Review is going to be spent on infrastructure in Northern Australia. That's important for our future defence, but so is industrial development as well. So out at East Arm, we've got land and we've got the ability. We need to become more efficient. There's some mining companies that can't get their critical minerals to port because of the inefficiencies at the port. So we need investment in the port. I've been working for many months now with Australian companies, super funds that are interested in taking over the lease. I've been connecting them with the Landbridge board because they've got an Australian...
So it's more of a diplomatic way to go to get the port back is what you're looking at.
Yeah, well, they're commercial negotiations that are occurring.
You say you're connecting them with the Landbridge board. Every public utterance I've heard from Landbridge has been unequivocal that the port is not for sale.
Well, obviously, as far as we know, there are really positive discussions towards that end. That's what.
So your discussions with Landbridge would contradict what they are saying publicly. Is that what?
Look, I've had discussions with people that suggest that you know what happens in a commercial deal. in a commercial deal, you get to a price point where they go, geez, that's a good deal. That's a really good return.
It's not a good deal for taxpayers if you have to do that, is it?
Yeah, well, that's where we differ from Peter Dutton. What Peter Dutton's saying, if a commercial deal can't be reached in 6 months, then the taxpayer's going to fork out. We've got more respect for taxpayers than that.
He's saying it'll be compulsorily acquired, and presumably, if it went to court, that'd be done on just terms, which is what happens in these
You don't reckon the taxpayers are going to be on the hook for that?
Well, absolutely, they'll be on the hook for that, but they'll be on the hook on just terms, as opposed to what you're talking about, which is a commercial deal, which could be anything, where Lambridge holds all the cards.
Well, a commercial deal obviously means that the current holders of the lease, Lambridge, will consider offers that are put to them. But I think what we need, and I think you understand this, Matt, is investment at the port and in East Arm generally. That is not happening. That will happen under an Albanese government.
I agree with that. I agree that investment is needed. But I guess the question is, what if that commercial deal can't be reached?
Obviously, that's when we have to assist.
So
but we're not going to put a time limit on it because that's idiotic. When you're in a negotiation, you don't put a time limit on it because all that says is to the proponent, we'll hold out and you'll get more money. Well, we are going to land at a place where there is a good return on investment for Lambridge, but the port will come back into Australian hands. So Albo and I will do that, have been working towards it for some time.
Well, look, the Coalition have committed and saying our national security is that important that we are going to do a 6-month limit on that. So if we don't able to get a successful commercial interest that's prepared to spend the money, then we will acquire it. And I think that's probably the difference between us and Labor. We are making a commitment to ensure that it comes back to Australian hands for national security.
Peter Dutton came here and made that announcement, but do you understand the people's, I'm not sure what the right word is, but the fact that they were a little bit bemused by that fact, given the port lease was done by a CLP government while a coalition government was in power.
While Peter Dutton was in the cabinet.
Yeah, look, and I think that's one of those things we can't look back. We can only look forward, and that's 10 years. It was a very different CLP government to what we have now in power, and we all want to see the port come back to Australian hands.
The current Chief Minister was part of that government, though.
Yes, she was, but not part of the decision-making around that, obviously.
She ran the inquiry.
Phil, what do you think? Does the port need to come back into Australian hands? And what do you think? Do you think that we need to do whatever is required to get it back?
Well, I haven't heard any compelling argument for how this is going to benefit taxpayers yet. I'm really interested to know what that benefit is because we sold it for $506 million. We're now going to have to endure sold the lease for $506 million. We're now going to have to endure a legal process to extricate ourselves from a 99-year lease agreement. Estimates are that that's $1.3 billion. I'm curious, what is the benefit to the taxpayer?
Well, I guess the question is who is going to pay that figure, whether it's $1.3 billion or hopefully that's an ambered claim. But is the proposal that the federal government stumps up that money, or does the Northern Territory government have to stump up that money?
As the Prime Minister's been clear, we are looking for a commercial deal. See, Lambridge and the CLP people who made this deal and then went off, I'm talking about, coalition people, Peter Dutton's mates in the federal cabinet, they went on and worked for Lambridge afterwards on about $850,000 a year. There's still people that are benefiting financially from the deal and don't want to see it change. That's their prerogative.
Look, I will say that I think both sides of politics, not on the port, but when you look at jobs that people go into after they leave politics, I know that there could be examples on either side of the fence with major parties where people have gone into jobs after being ministers.
Well, this one's just relevant to what we're talking about.
It may well be, but we're fast running out of time, and I want to talk about Middle Arm. Now, at a candidates forum in Alice Springs last month, we know the Lingiari MP, Marion Scrimgeour, spoke about the planned Middle Arm industrial hub, saying the federal government's $1.5 billion equity share loan to the project was presenting a hurdle. One of the biggest hurdles in Middle Arm, she said, is the whole project is equity-based. The Northern Territory government is signalling to the federal government that they don't want to put their equity to it. They just want the federal government to continue to fund this on their own. The federal government has said no. If you want this to happen, it has to be with the agreements that were signed with the former government. Now, she said that the Northern Territory was not anywhere near getting the sign-off on the project.
That's just, Katie, just quickly, that is because it is not stacking up commercially and it is not stacking up environmentally. Because it just doesn't stack up currently. They've got a lot more work to do. But
so you're not committed to Middle Arm anymore?
Why? No, Middle Arm's important. I'll tell you why it's important. Is if we're going to reach net zero, and that's where we want to move to, we need renewable energy from Territory Sunshine going into that precinct, and critical minerals, which we know there's many proponents that are looking at it to process their critical minerals, but also making batteries. If we're going to have a renewable energy future, we need the batteries. We need to produce batteries. Green hydrogen is another one.
Green hydrogen's has not been successful anywhere it's been tried in this country at this point. In fact, we've seen many of the major players pull out of it in the last couple of years.
Twiggy Forrest was talking about doing it here out at Middle Arm, and then he pulled out. But he pulled out of a lot of places, right? Green hydrogen is going to have a role, but it's the critical mineral stuff that's so important, but powered by Sun Cable. 2/3 of Sun Cable's power, that's the world's biggest precinct of solar, is going to go into that precinct to fire green industry. The other 1/3 will go by undersea cable to Singapore, which helps them.
Again, another technology that's never worked at that scale before. I mean, that's my question. Is
These
this
are big calls.
I know
that's what we're committed
is
to.
this all just pie in the sky stuff that's never going to happen? Because it certainly, and Marion Scrimger's cast a lot of doubt over Middle Arm. We have these big arguments about Middle Arm, about whether it's going to pollute us to death or whether it's going to be our great renewable saviour. But my biggest question about Middle Arm is whether it's actually feasibly ever going to happen at all.
Well, yes, it will. Yes, it will. And before Phil starts protesting, and because, let's face it, people who have been here for a while understand. Look, I think it's great that people like Phil can come here and protest about Lee Point and protest about Middle Arm after a very short period, and then talk over Lisa, who's born and bred, spent her whole life here. What we need here is industrial development, but we need industrial development that is powered by solar, because we've got heaps of land and heaps of sunshine.
We're fast running out of time, so I'm going to just get Phil's take. I mean, Phil, Luke kicking the boot in a little bit there about your former protesting. I mean, obviously you are opposed to the Middle Arm development.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's go for starters on economic grounds. Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis point out that the plan is fundamentally flawed and the business model is not viable. These aren't greenies, these are hawks in oil and petrochemical industry analysis. The robust market for LNG exports is anticipated in the plan is unlikely to materialise. The off-taker industries anticipated to become partners are unlikely to locate in the Northern Territory. Relying on CCS, as you pointed out, Matt, is unrealistic. I mean, they outline 12 key risks, any of which on their own make the proposal outrageously unbeneficial for taxpayers. We're not going to get anything out of this, and our community remembers the prosperity that was promised from the last big gas plant across the harbour. We were told that was going to kickstart the Northern Territory economy. INPEX, absolutely.
So you feel as though INPEX should never have happened?
Well, I mean, look at the outcome. We were promised prosperity. That thing was supposed to be a boon. 10 years on,
it's just against any sort of development
trying to sell their house.
There's about 800 people
I will just
there.
ask, because I know a lot of people listening. Yeah, good point.
Yep.
A lot of people listening will be keen to know, Phil. I mean, are you totally against the development of gas?
We need to transition away from gas. It's expensive anyway.
So
why would we? Why? I mean, this is one. We talk about cost of living. We have amongst the highest.
So Beetaloo, should it go ahead?
No, not in a million years. That thing is so unbeneficial to the taxpayer that it's outrageous.
All right, Lisa, in terms of middle arm, do you
Plus
support
these guys
it
don't
or
pay
not?
Tax.
Yes, absolutely support middle arm, and I see it's an
'Cause
opportunity
there's no
for the Northern
economic vision
Territory
from
to
you guys.
ensure that we can have this development not only just for this generation but for generations to come. In relation to Beetaloo Basin, there's more gas that's in Beetaloo than there's oil in Dubai. So understanding what that means, not just for the Northern Territory but for all of Australia, that's natural gas we're talking about. It's something that we've got a shortage. Australia that's abundant in their resources. We have a shortage of gas in this country, and the Northern Territory is poised where we could actually deliver that gas, that much-needed natural gas, safely and under regulation to not just the Northern Territory but for all of Australia. We are running out of that. That is a
You would
reliable.
say that because you take money from the fracking companies. So you're a mouthpiece for them.
That's a reliable.
Well, but Phil, we can't find out exactly where you're getting your funding from either,
I
though.
told you
So
before,
you
have a
lose
look
that
on that.
argument.
So
Actually,
Phil,
I
I'm
did.
sorry, but you
I
work for
have-
Frack-Free
I'm-
NT,
I did.
and it's very hard to take what you're saying seriously because anything to
Look,
do with
I will
with
say,
natural gas.
'cause I
Yeah,
know
but
our
I don't
listeners-
take money from corporations.
All right, I know our
Oh,
listeners
Phil.
will be interested in this. I did
do.
go online and I tried to find all of the people that are donating, and it is literally just a page of names upon names. So it doesn't actually give you, it doesn't actually tell you whether they are part of any business or anything like that. It's individuals' names. It doesn't give you a breakdown of who's donating to the Northern Territory. It doesn't give you a breakdown of who's donating to your campaign. So I did try and go and have a look at that just for the sake of transparency from my side of things, and I wasn't able to get that level of detail that I was hoping for. But look, we are going to have to take a quick break because it's already 10 o'clock and I still need to give you all the opportunity to tell people why they should vote for you. So let's take a really quick break. You are listening to Mix 1049's 360. If you have just joined us, it's been an eventful hour. The text line's going berserk. I've got heaps of messages to get through. But look, we have indeed got in the studio with us this morning 3 of the Solomon candidates: Phil Scott, who's running as an independent, Lisa Bayliss, who's running for the CLP, and Luke Gosling, the incumbent for the Labor Party. Now, you have each got a minute. This is the one part where you're not allowed to talk over the top of each other, but you've each got a minute to explain to our listeners why they should vote for you. Luke, I might let you go first. Are you ready? Let's hear it.
Well, thanks, Katie, for the opportunity, and well done, Matt. Look, I've been really proud over the last 3 years of our first term of federal government to be working with the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. I'm really proud that he's been to the Territory more times than Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison combined, and that we're really seriously developing in the social and economic development of the Northern Territory. Now, up on my Facebook page, I'll have 2 maps. One of Solomon with all the things I've either delivered or that we've committed to delivering and are on the way to delivering, and a broader map of the Northern Territory with all the roads investments that we're making as well, because we need the ability for industry to get their product to market. We need to build the Northern Territory's economy, and I am 100% the same with making our community safer, committed to working with the NT government to achieve that. But let's just talk about the economy quickly. We've brought down 2 budget surpluses. We've brought down inflation, and that means that people with a mortgage are soon going to get that relief, and that's really important for Territorians.
Oh, and that is the minute. Luke Gosling, well done. Now, let me just restart my stopwatch and go to Lisa Bayliss from the CLP.
Oops, sorry, I was going to put my stopwatch on too. Thank you, Katie. Look, a little bit about me. Those that don't know, I'm born and bred here, lived me here my whole life. My mum and dad, Daryl, Maureen, Manzi, retired here, have lived here their whole life since the 60s, pretty much most of their working life in the Territory. I'm committed to the Northern Territory. I've done 30 years as a Northern Territory police officer. I've lived and worked in many different areas. I have a very good understanding of the root causes of crime and the issues that the Territory faces. I know that you need a strong voice in Canberra. We've had, Gosling's been there for 9 years, and I look around and look at the Territory and think, what has he actually achieved for us? Because it's not what it should be. And in order to be able to fight and have a strong voice, you need someone who's committed to the Territory and is prepared to fight tooth and nail. And I'm going to work hand in hand with the Leah Finocchiaro NT government to ensure that we get not just our fair share that we should be around the country. I think earlier we spoke about per capita. This is something that the Territory needs to have a greater spotlight put on them, and I'm going to fight for that in Canberra.
All right, 1 minute is up, and our final candidate for this morning, independent Phil Scott.
So when developing public policy, I actually have the courage and the willingness to actually consult with experts from our community, and I don't have a bunch of party bosses 3,000 kilometres away who have little to no interest in the territory, pulling strings and calling the shots. That's why we're in the state of neglect in our healthcare system, in education, in social outcomes, and a stagnating economy that is decades in the making. And I can say that with a lot of confidence, because look where we are today. All we're talking about is neglect. So I'm saying plan, use data and implement what works, not what's suitable for a major party every 3 years in their political interest. Bring in the knowledge and expertise of community who not only understand our problems deeply, but also deeply understand what the solutions are.
Well, Phil, thank you so much for your time this morning, and you came in about 5 seconds under, mate. Thank you.
Too
Phil
easy.
Scott, who is running as an independent, thank you for joining us this morning. Lisa Bayliss for the CLP, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Katie.
And Luke Gosling for the Labor Party, thank you for your time this morning.
Good on you, Katie.
I couldn't let Matt go, though, without saying thank you to Matt. I didn't give you a minute, mate, to say why people should vote for you.
Need more than a minute for that.
Thank you all so much for your time. I know it's an interesting format for the week that was, but it's been a lot of fun. Thank you.